Thank you, Fern. Thank you, Ali, and to all the other people at UWT for organizing this event. It's really a great pleasure to be with you here today and to share the panel with Ann, Aaron, and Linda. So, what is Tacoma's story? And what does the telling of that story have to do with the city's branding and place identity? I can't pretend to know much, if anything, about Tacoma, so I'll engage in the questions indirectly. Let me begin by telling you a story about Aalborg, Denmark. Aalborg is one of a large number of cities that I've visited over the years, including some that students and I have visited on field trips or virtually by using Google Earth, YouTube, Wikipedia, and similar technologies. These cities have included the Gateway to the South, the City that Care Forgot, the City of Stones, the City of Fountains, the Gathering Place by the Waters, and many others. Aalborg itself is a city of around 200,000 people at the northern tip of Denmark. It used to be heavily industrialized, but like so many other cities in Europe and the US, it deindustrialized in the 1970s and 80s, and its government and business leaders have been spending the past couple decades trying to transform or even erase the traces of that historic legacy. They have been trying instead to attract attention, capital, tourists, and residents by reinventing Aalborg as, quote, an experience city, one based on service, knowledge, and culture. As part of this effort, Aalborg has been constructing new images and representations of itself, that is, by giving itself a new brand. In 2004, the city initiated a branding campaign which it called Aalborg, Seizing the World. The campaign identified 4 values that were said to lie at the core of Aalborg's identity: diversity, wide prospects, teamwork, and drive. A booklet accompanying the campaign proclaimed, "We are not like anyone else," and culturally, Aalborg has the whole palette, from fine culture to subculture and avant-garde. The campaign also used a logo, which sought to capture the idea of Aalborg being outward-looking and having a global perspective. So here you see it. I learned about the city's branding campaign from my colleague Ole Jensen. Ole is a professor at Aalborg University who had, in 2007, published a scholarly article titled "Culture Stories, Understanding Cultural Urban Branding." After reading that article, I decided to use it in a course I was going to teach in the fall of 2009, a course which I called Designing Europe, Spatial Planning and Identity in Europe. According to Jensen, Aalborg's branding effort was linked to the global discourse about the creative city. Citing Bilbao, Spain, and other exemplars of successful urban transformations, this discourse emphasized the importance of attracting knowledge-based workers, or what Richard Florida has labeled the creative class. Innovation, art, and creative capacities had to be enhanced. In the context of this global discourse, cities like Aalborg were using storytelling to motivate and legitimate their efforts, with the stories both representing and producing space. Jensen illustrated his theoretical claims by focusing on a proposed renovation of Aalborg's harbor front, where a number of flagship architecture projects and cultural institutions were being planned as part of a new culture triangle. The projects included Nordkraft, which is the name of a former power plant being turned into a culture hub inspired by the Tate Modern in London. According to Jensen, public debate revealed that some people found the branding campaign, quote, too generic and general to be specific to Aalborg, and thus not emblematic of the character of the city, unquote. The main criticism had to do with identification, that is, with what sort of city the citizens thought they were living in. Jensen claimed, with Aalborg's campaign, we have left the realm of the factual and become embedded in a visionary story of a city transforming its future in accordance with its history and identity. and the plot was being articulated on the basis of the city's ability to compete globally. Jensen also reported that proponents and opponents were telling competing stories about the proposed renovation, and that the stories differed radically in their relationship to place. In his view, many of the opponents were much less organized voices on the margin who told stories based primarily on a populist shared fear of the elite. So, remember, this was in a course that I was teaching. So to help my students understand how Aalborg's branding campaign and Jensen's interpretation related to our course, I had them view an official 6.5-minute video that Aalborg city government had produced. Let's take a look. After watching this video on YouTube, my students said they thought it could have been produced by almost any city, almost anywhere in the world. I don't know whether you would agree with that or not. It's a point we can return to in the Q&A. Recalling Professor Jensen's claim that competing stories were being told, I found another YouTube video, which satirized the cities. It had been produced by some young alienated Aalborgians, and, unlike the one we just watched, was entirely in Danish. Alas, I can no longer find the video online. As Jensen reported to me in an email, this video focused on, quote, the other side of Aalborg, bars, strip bars, gambling casinos. And when they pay credit to the nice side, the church, the Aalborg Tower, the zoo, the library, they do it in a massively ironic way. The underlying tone is one of partly fatigue and boredom with small-town living, and on the other side, a love of the place where most of them probably grew up. Well, local officials did not respond too kindly to the alienated youth's version of Aalborg's story. According to Jensen, the chief of the Communications and Public Relations Office at Aalborg University criticized it for, quote, undermining the new and positive image of Aalborg as a nice student city, unquote. But this statement got the officer into a lot of trouble, as many people felt he was trying to sanitize the image of the city, which Jensen says he surely was. He was later interviewed in the local media saying that the rough working class ambiance of the city was part of its genuine identity. In sum, Aalborg's officials produced the video to tell their branding story about Aalborg. The local public interpreted that video in conflicting ways. Some young Aalborgians produced their own counter-narrative. Students in an Iowa classroom viewed and interpreted the official video, and now we're in Tacoma sharing the story of Aalborg's branding effort and its reception. What can we learn from this brief tale about branding identity and storytelling in Aalborg? My tale reveals first that the official branding effort did not authentically represent the full complexity of Aalborg's identity. Rather, that branding effort was, as Jensen put it, a form of selective storytelling aimed at persuading its recipients to see the city in a particular way. Ultimately, in his view, the narrative and physical construction of the culture triangle in Aalborg was lacking in public validation and carried the hallmark of a place myth. This tale about Aalborg's branding effort also conveys a sense of how stories and storytelling work in the public realm. Like similar officials in other cities, Aalborg's leaders believed they had a good story to tell. It was a story they thought could be used to shape the audience's attention and hence Aalborg's future by turning it this way rather than that. But what constitutes a good story? It involves much more than merely listing facts or ordering events chronologically. Instead, a good storyteller must use all the elements of the storytelling craft to narrate the unfolding events over time in some particular location. The teller has to decide where to begin and end the tale, how to arrange and shape, that is, implot, the flow of events, how to fill the flow of action with interesting and believable characters who act in appropriate settings, and how to build conflict, crisis, and resolution into the story such that key antagonists are somehow changed or moved significantly. The teller also has to draw upon the imagery and rhythm of language and the visual and oral arts to express a preferred attitude toward the situation and its characters. Well, these are useful and necessary concepts for anybody who is crafting a story, but they don't fully explain how the meaning of a story like Aalborg's gets constructed. The meaning of a story lies not just in the teller's intent or in the written or cinematic versions of the tale. The meaning also lies in what the various audiences bring to the story. As we learned from my students' response, not all audiences receive the message Aalborg's storytellers intended to convey. The meaning of a story is, in other words, contestable and negotiated between the teller and its many audiences. We should also note that more than one story can be told about any particular place. Consequently, the audiences for one story frequently are also the tellers of their own tales. As was the case in Aalborg, their stories often differ from the official ones they receive. Moreover, both storytellers and recipients are characters in each other's stories, often in ways they can scarcely recognize. The story about Aalborg also suggests that future-oriented storytelling about places is tightly connected to physical design. Simply put, plans act as claims. Those claims are rooted in a range of locally grounded stories and common urban narratives, and those narratives influence the physical transformation of places over time. Reciprocally, the physical design of places affects the stories and arguments that can be told and to whom they can be told. Lastly, the reception of Aalborg's branding video in my Iowa class and the fact that the video is now being discussed here indicates how stories circulate through webs of relationships. Those webs include face-to-face relationships, but they also involve global-scale interaction through Facebook, Twitter, and all the other new social media. Because they are told, interpreted, and contested as they circulate through these webs, stories can stimulate a chain reaction in which each part becomes the cause of new processes with unpredictable consequences. The meaning of a story will, in other words, go well beyond the control of the teller. The implication is stark and important. Crafting a story is one thing, but in the end it is the interaction between the teller and the story's various recipients that really matters. To tell a truly persuasive story about any city's identity and future, a teller has to construct the story in a way that persuades diverse people to feel that their own voices are authentically represented in the whole. It is not, in other words, simply a matter of telling one story. One should instead consider who is telling the story to whom. What kind of person does the teller's story invite the recipient to be? What kind of community does the storytelling seek to create, both among its diverse recipients and between the recipient and the storyteller? Thanks. Sorry.